and welcome to Associations Now Live at the 2020 ASAE Technology Exploration Conference, brought to you virtually this year. I'm Julie Shoup, Editor-in-Chief of Associations Now. I hope you'll join me each morning at Tech Virtual to get a peek at the hot technology topics that association professionals are talking about these days. If it wasn't clear before, this year has driven home the point that association technology is much more than a set of back-end systems that only the IT team needs to worry about. 9 months into the pandemic, imagine where we'd be without it. The learning and networking at this conference are all about how technology powers association success across every discipline, every day. To get us started, our first guest this morning is Moira Edwards, who has been immersed in technology applications and data analysis for many years in associations, in government, and in the corporate sector. Since 2012, she's served as president of Ellipsis Partners, which helps associations develop technology strategy. In a learning lab tomorrow, she and her co-presenters will lead a discussion about seeing tech strategy through a new lens after this year of disruption. Thank you for joining me this morning, Moira.
Thank you, Julie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, you describe your session tomorrow as a therapeutic conversation about technology, almost as if folks just need to vent a little. Tell me what you mean by that.
So absolutely. We have been through it all this year. So I think it's a bit about venting, but it's also about commiserating together and celebrating. We did a mini survey as part of our session, and so many people who responded said that they were ready to go. It was actually very inspiring to hear that so many of our association colleagues were ready to pivot to go remote at a moment's notice. But it was still a struggle and a lot of work. And so we wanted to start by giving them a chance to talk about that and share their stories with others.
So going from that and looking ahead into the future, what are some new ways of thinking about technology that are needed now?
It became clear as we worked on our session that really getting focused was very important in this year. Being focused on what members need, having a laser focus on what was important to them in terms of COVID resources, online learning, all of these things that they really needed at that time. Also engagement. And at the same time, being focused on what was holding staff back and removing any inefficiencies that were in their way, any old paper-based processes. So we really came to see that we had to get very clear about what was needed. At the same time, we had to be very strategic about what new projects to take on. Tori in our session, Tori Liu from ASAE in our session talks about stage gating, which is this really interesting concept of managing projects and having a very strong focus on them at different stages. So rather than maybe letting a project continue through its entire life cycle without review, ASAE has gotten very intentional about reviewing the progress and the goals and the success of each project on a regular basis. So again, very intentional in their approach.
So using this different type of approach, do you think organizations need to define success differently than they used to?
You know, Julie, I think success is what it's always been, which is being relevant to our members. But what they need now has changed. What is relevant to them as they face this pandemic, this crazy year, is different now than it was last year, certainly.
So obviously technology represents a big investment for associations, and many organizations right now are feeling more financial constraints. What are some guideposts for making technology investment decisions in these circumstances?
Right. So following on this idea of organizational efficiency, what we see is that organizations are really focusing on what is holding their staff back, what is sucking up their time. My other co-presenter, Anne Ornelas from CAS, which is a very small organization, talks about how they are continuing with really some large projects. They're going to continue to develop their website because their members really need a strong way to access resources and their staff need a better way to do that. So what they're looking at is continuing a strong focus on member needs and a strong focus on making things better for their staff.
And doing that would potentially justify even a relatively large investment in these times. Would that be right?
It does. And I think in general, organizations are looking on what is a drain on annual expenses that isn't giving them an appropriate return. What can they change in their members' lives that results in increased engagement and increased loyalty to the organization?
So what do you think, given all of that, is the biggest strategic opportunity that has surfaced in the pandemic that maybe wasn't clear before, where associations can leverage technology to best advantage?
So I think at a superficial level, it's about the things that we know, the virtual events, the online networking, the online learning. But I think at a deeper level, the biggest strategic opportunity that has come out of the last year is the fact that we have realized we are more digitally powerful than we ever recognized before. We have the capacity to work remotely, to offer online engaging programs, to increase attendance at our events. And that's an amazing understanding that I think we can capitalize on for the years to come.
Yeah. Well, you've built a lot of expertise over the years that can be applied to organizations, but just bringing it down to a smaller scale for a moment, I wonder if your personal experience of the past year has taught you anything new or surprising about technology.
I think what is clear is how important connection is, and being intentional about using all of the avenues we possibly can to foster connection and caring and humor and creating opportunities to still be a team, because it's becoming very clear that all of this distance is impacting our organizational culture. So we have to be intentional about fostering a good culture and about using technology to keep us connected.
Yeah. Which sort of brings us back to a little therapy that we might all need right now together. So thank you, Moira, for that preview of tomorrow's session. For our viewers, you can catch Moira's Learning Lab, New Lens on Technology Strategy After a Year of Disruption, tomorrow morning at 11:15. But for now, here are a couple of your fellow tech attendees sharing what technology challenges are keeping them up at night.
Hi, I'm Mel Jordan Carr, VP of Membership with American Trucking Associations, streaming from Upper Marlboro, Maryland. What keeps me up at night is data management. It is everything from data literacy with our staff, data governance, making sure that when our systems are talking, they're also listening to each other. But most importantly, it's just everything about data. Data is huge. It encompasses everything. So that's what keeps me up at night.
Well, my name is Tiffany Crosby, and I am joining you from my home office in Dublin, Ohio, which is where I'll be joining in on the conference. And the thing that really keeps me up at night, or just that I'm focused upon, is how to continue to enhance the virtual experience while still making it seamless to our members and making it easy for them to navigate. So I don't want to lose that convenience factor, but I still want to continue to be able to add interaction and other functionality. So how best we do that and do so on a budget and do so relatively quickly are the things that I think about.
I'm Lisa Boylan. The tech challenges we just heard about from attendees are certainly familiar to our next guest. John Sullivan has spent more than 30 years in association technology leadership, the last 15 of them as Chief Information Officer at the American Chemical Society. He's here to talk with us about how associations are integrating technology into all aspects of their operations. Thank you so much for joining us today, John, and sharing your expertise during an exceptionally challenging time. First, What do you see as the primary ways in which technology has become an integral part of an organization, top to bottom, and not merely as a help desk?
Well, most nonprofit organizations at some level or another are in information business, transfer of knowledge, publishing, community efforts, networking, all of which have deep implications for an organization's technology. It's central to the value proposition of nonprofit organizations and is not separate from the business itself.
What kinds of technology challenges and successes have you been surprised that organizations have navigated during the past 9 months?
No real surprises. I think that the entire planet was lucky that this happened in 2020 and not a few years ago. We would have stumbled through many of the remote working challenges would have been much more difficult a few years ago. The advances in cloud computing and collaboration platforms has made the transition much easier than it otherwise would have been. I think the challenges that organizations face really vary by their circumstances and economic condition. The very practical challenge of broken processes when you're used to working internally and kind of fixing those just to make sure your core services are up and running, and a rapid response to changing requirements from the business, particularly when it comes to meetings. Here at the American Chemical Society, we've already canceled one large meeting last spring in Philadelphia, and then rapidly converted a meeting that had been planned for San Francisco into a completely virtual event. All of those activities mean that technology is centered to the organization's ability to be successful during this period of time. And I'd also say that we found a new vein of vendors that can support our large governance meetings successfully. And we had a 500-person council meeting over the summer. If you had told me a year ago that would ever be possible, given the demographic of the participants, I would have really been doubtful. To see it come to fruition under these circumstances gives me great confidence about the future.
Well, what integral changes brought on by the pandemic do you think are here to stay?
I think that the meeting planning and travel industry will forever be changed. I think that there will be an expectation, particularly from nonprofit organizations who rely on these meetings for the preponderance of their revenue, to really plan always for hybrid events, even when they're were traditionally in-person events, and always be prepared to pivot to virtual. And so I think that entire profession is going to become more complex and more challenging for our colleagues in those areas. I think ultimately training and travel will change. I think that we've proven that much of our training that used to involve trips to distant locations can actually be done just as effectively. So I think that there's a long-term cost savings there. And I think that eventually this will have pretty profound impacts on organizations' flexible working and remote working policies. At ACS, we don't believe the time to make those decisions is under the cloud of a pandemic. So we're doing an enormous amount of learning that we will bring with us back to the office whenever we are able to return, which is of course on top of an already existing fairly flexible work arrangement program that we already had.
Thank you so much, John, for joining us today and for giving your very fascinating perspective on technology right now. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
I'm Samantha Whitehorn. Earlier in the show, we had a few attendees share what tech problems keep them up at night, but we wanted to give you the chance to get to know another colleague. And we figured no better way to do that than by having them answer a few questions, 7 to be exact, about themselves and the work they do.
Now I'd like to welcome Demita Snow, Senior Manager of Publishing Technologies at the American Society of Civil Engineers. Thanks for joining us today, Demita, and for letting viewers learn a little bit more about you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the invitation.
Let's kick things off with a question I'm sure we've both been asked a lot. How did you end up in associations?
Early in my career, I actually wanted to work in an ad agency. I ended up getting a graphic design job at an association, and I never left the association world.
Great. What's one tech tool or gadget that you can't live without?
Just one. Well, I have several. I will mention two: Awesome Screenshot and Color Oracle.
Okay. And since the pandemic started, what success, professional or personal, are you most proud of?
I talk to my family much more, and my extended family and friends hear from me much more since March.
Okay. And as you stream Tech Virtual, what snack are you most likely to be eating?
No snacks, but definitely drinking a lot of green tea.
And what about your most used emoji?
I don't really like emojis, but I find myself using the thumbs up a lot.
And what's your favorite part of your current job?
I like learning about the new tools available to get my job done, the increased focus in the industry on accessibility, and addressing issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And of course, I like working with my colleagues.
Great. And final question. If you weren't an association exec, what job would you have instead?
I would be a community organizer. Long story behind that.
Thanks for being such a good sport, Demita.
Thank you.
Now back to Julie, who will wrap up today's show.
That's it for today's edition of Associations Now Live. Please join me again tomorrow at 9:45 when we'll share a sampling of what's to come in Tuesday's full slate of education sessions. We'll also have a conversation with our keynoter, Bon and Bao, about breaking things in order to make way for new ones. Thank you for joining us this morning. Have a great day.